Welcome to the 71st episode of the New Ventures podcast. I am your host, Sanjoy Sanyal, the founder of Regain Paradise, a boutique climate finance firm and a visiting fellow at the Cambridge Judge Business School. Along with my co-host, Professor Jaideep Prabhu, we try and understand the links between climate change and food security in these series of conversations.
Hi, I'm Jaideep Prabhu. I'm a professor of marketing at Cambridge Judge Business School. I'm very interested in the area of frugal innovation, how organizations of all sizes can do more and better with less. And through my interest in frugal innovation, I'm interested in issues to do with food security and climate change as well.
Our guest for today is Tausif Ahmed Qurashi, the Senior Program Manager of the Climate Change Program in BRAC. Many of our audience members will be already familiar with BRAC in Bangladesh. I have done a podcast with Dr. Mohammed Ghulam Rabbani, who has set up a unique climate fund with support from the German Development Bank last year. So instead of asking our guest to introduce his organization, I'm actually going to ask you, Jaideep, to tell us why you are so looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you, Sanjay. It's a great pleasure to be talking to Tausif about BRAC because I've been a huge fan of BRAC ever since I visited in 2012. As people may know, BRAC is by some accounts the world's largest NGO. But it's more than just an NGO. It does things that many governments do not do at scale. Even though it gets donor money, it also raises its own money to cover much of its costs. And it organizes itself in ways that even large companies don't. I have visited about 5 times since 2012 and have got to know various programs quite well. A couple of my PhD students did their PhDs on BRAC-related work. My first encounter with BRAC was in 2012 when I visited Dhaka. And the highlight of that meeting was meeting Sir Fazle Hassan Abid, or Abid Bhai as everybody in BRAC calls him. They used to also call him chairperson. He was the founder of BRAC and the chairperson. And we met on several occasions. He was a big fan of frugal innovation, himself being such an impressive frugal innovator over so many years leading BRAC. And then we invited him to Cambridge Judge Business School. He gave a talk to a packed lecture hall, our largest lecture hall, such an inspiring conversation. And then he signed an MOU with our dean, an MOU between Judge Business School and BRAC, which was quite comprehensive to look at joint research, joint dissemination of findings towards development. So wonderful memories over the years of Sir Fazle Hassan Abid, and I think we should dedicate this podcast to his memory. So really looking forward to this podcast with Tausif.
Thank you very much.
Tausif, let me jump right in. I found the holistic approach of the adaptation clinic very interesting. Can you tell us a bit more about it?
Thank you so much for inviting me today. Adaptation Clinic is an amazing innovation from BRAC. This clinic is working for the climate vulnerable farmers in Bangladesh. So this clinic is providing holistic services to the farmers who are from the climate vulnerable areas. And it's all about the cropping plan and the technological support, input support, and weather forecast and the capacity development.
Thanks, Tausif. I'm trying to understand, because you told me this, that the adaptation clinic is very focused around food security. Is this right?
Yes. One of the pillars of our adaptation clinic is food security.
And that's what puzzles me. Jaideep said he has been there 5 times. I don't know how many times I've been there to Bangladesh. I know how beautiful and green the country is and how fertile the land is. So it's hard for me to reconcile agricultural food crisis with Bangladesh. What evidence do you have that there is a food crisis brewing out there?
Yes, exactly. One of the economic pillar, Bangladesh is doing great in agriculture. But in recent years, we are facing challenges in agriculture because of the climate change issues. We are having temperature increase. Last year, it was the highest temperature recorded in Bangladesh. And there are severe flood occurred also in last year. So we are having some climatic issues. Those are making more challenges to the agriculture in Bangladesh.
But Tausif, it's probably not just climate change. Am I correct? Some of the challenges to agriculture may be coming from human misuse, shall we say, of fertilizers, things like that.
Yes, along with the climate change issues, there are some concern areas like as the densely populated country, the agricultural land is decreasing gradually. So land crisis is a huge crisis. And along with, there are lots of pest infestation and other issues. Those are also the threat for the agriculture in Bangladesh. But the climate change is a major concern because the temperature increase, flood, cyclone, salinity intrusion, these are the major challenges in agriculture in Bangladesh right now.
Just to follow up, Tausif, because I know that in India we've had issues around excessive use of groundwater, excessive use of fertilizer, the quality of the soil is dropped. Do you see some of those issues as well in Bangladesh?
Yes, we see the water crisis in the drought-prone areas in Barind. Earlier, they could have water, but right now the groundwater is a great concern for them. They're not having enough water for agriculture, so they had to shift their cropping pattern also because of the water scarcity.
I would ask a follow-up question which Jaideep just asked you. One issue often that we have seen in many countries, especially in countries of Asia, is that too much dependence on one staple crop, for example, rice, right? And that leads to dropping soil fertility. That's not really a climate change issue. It's just an agricultural practice issue. Do you see that in Bangladesh as well?
Yes, you have rightly said, as rice is the staple crop in Bangladesh, so people used to cultivate rice. Even in some lands, they used to cultivate 3 times rice in a land. So if farmer cultivate a single crop around the year, this particular crop will take a kind of nutrition that may hamper, the ecosystem. So that's why we always prefer the crop rotation, and the cropping pattern could be including rice along with the non-rice crops. So it could be, good for the entire ecosystem.
I just wanted to know, Tausif, what about some traditional crops? Like in India, some states are encouraging farmers to return to traditional grains like millets and so on. Do you have some of that happening in Bangladesh too?
Not really, because our experience is a bit different. As earlier we talked about the food security, the food security is a major concern for our country. So we are not going to those indigenous varieties in large scale because we have to ensure the bulk production for the country. But we are trying to accommodate other non-rice crops, changing the cropping pattern so that we can have more production of pulses and oilseeds crops and the vegetables along with the rice crops. Because in rice, we are now in a good position having production that is good for our annual consumption. But for other crops, we are not in a good situation. But if we can improve our cropping pattern, so then we can have more other crops from the year-round practices.
So then I wanted to still go back and understand the food security issue here. Obviously, anybody who knows the history of Bangladesh knows that born in 1971, it was a very significant food importer, but that the country has become a lot self-sufficient. But today, does Bangladesh have to import food?
Yeah, recently we did well in terms of rice. In last fiscal year, we didn't import any rice, though the current fiscal year, we have imported rice around more than 500 metric ton. But we are still dependent for wheat and pulses and other crops for having meet our requirement in Bangladesh.
So linking this with food security issue, do you see, for example, there's a significant migration from the rural areas to the urban areas, from Bangladesh to other parts of the world? Do you see people keeping land fallow? Do you see number of crops being cultivated and sown, drop down? So, for example, a particular piece of land used to have 2 crops. Now it has 1 crop because there's no people. Soil is not fertile. Just give us a picture of that thing that you see in rural Bangladesh.
Yes, in last decade we have observed, and also it has been reported in couple of study, that the cropping intensity in some places where usually farmer practice double crop, right now they are not able to cultivate double or triple crop because of the increasing salinity intrusion and also the water crisis in the dry season. So this is also a concern for us. People cannot cultivate year round because of the salinity intrusion and water scarcity in the dry period.
Tausif, the salinity issue, how much of that is because of climate change and how much of that is because of human interventions?
Salinity intrusion is affected by the both factors, climatic and non-climatic. One of the reason, the sea level rise and the nearest coastal areas because of cyclones and other flooding, salinity intrusion is a common scenario. But along with that, also some people, they expanded the stream cultivation and they entered the salt water into their community. This is also another problem and why the salinity is increasing in the south. This is a practice and behavioral issues. But I think there are two factors are influencing and increasing the salinity, both practice from the ground and also climatic issues as well.
I think we've understood both the issues of food security. We've understood the causes, both climatic, non-climatic, Tausif. So let's go back to the adaptation clinic. Tell us, where do you work? And of course, how do you measure success?
Yes, the climate vulnerabilities are different in different areas in Bangladesh. We see the different context in the coastal areas, barren areas, floodplain areas, and the hilly areas. So adaptation clinic is, the context specific. So we provide the climate adaptive agricultural technologies along with the other services, but these technologies are very much context specific. So what we offer to the coastal farmers is not necessarily same for the drought-prone farmers. So this is the uniqueness of the adaptation clinic.
Can you tell us a bit about your work, the process? Like, how do you go about identifying where there's a problem? Where do you focus your attention and priorities? How do you engage the communities?
We have identified the climate vulnerable upazilas. We have the vulnerability assessment score. And then while we select the upazila, we go for the community climate vulnerability assessment to measure their exposure, sensitivity, and the adaptive capacity. Then we can find out the actual vulnerabilities of that locality. Then we start conducting the surveys for the vulnerable farmers and we prepare a baseline for them. And then we start developing a cropping pattern from them. Considering the crop calendar and disaster calendar of that locality, we jointly prepare a cropping plan for the farmers into their community. And then we follow up with them for a year with the year-round cultivation, year-round practices with improved agricultural method so that within a year, they can improve their skills, capacity, and the practices. And then further, we follow up them for another year. And gradually, we cover the farmers of different villages in the vulnerable areas.
So, Tausif, tell us a little bit about what is an upazila. I know it's an administrative unit. How many villages, how big would an upazila be? How many people would be involved in that kind of unit?
Upazila is a sub-district in Bangladesh. So, on an average, in every district, there are 4 to 7 upazilas. And each upazila, there are couple of unions. And union is the lowest administrative tier in Bangladesh. So we work in the union level in each upazila, and every union average the population size is 25 to 40,000 in each union. So we work in the villages under the vulnerable union.
And I know that BRAC is particularly known for its community-led development. I remember Sir Fazle Abid Bhai talking so many times about that vision of his. How is the community involved in all your activities?
Yes, it is very important because we want to promote the locally led adaptation. So community engagement is very important to facilitate the locally led adaptation. There are advisory committee we have formed in each adaptation clinic, and this committee has been formed with the community leaders, local farmers, and the locally influential peoples. And also, there are a advisory position, and this position is from the local level agricultural office. Sub-assistant agriculture officer from the agriculture office work as an advisor in that committee. So we engage this committee right from the beginning of our work. This committee helps us to identify the best practices and what could be good for them. This committee is a community platform which closely working with our adaptation clinic in the ground.
I wanted to, like Jaideep, dig a little bit here. And one of the terms that you used was climate vulnerability assessment. Now, some of our audience knows that this is quite a detailed process, but the way, Tausif, I understand it, is that you measure a community's exposure to climate change, right? Increasing salinity, increasing temperature, whatever it is. Then you understand how sensitive that exposure is. And from there, you also weigh it against the adaptive capacity. The community could be rich and could have high adaptive capacity. And from there, you assess the vulnerability. That's the technical process, I understand. But what will be really useful is to help us understand how you do this analysis in some more detail.
Yes, we conduct some focus group discussion into the community. We talk with the people of the community and we try to identify their exposure and sensitivity. So some of the villages and houses are near to the river, for example. So they are more exposed to the flood than those households who are far from the river. So we try to identify information from the ground about their exposure and their sensitivity with their socioeconomic situation and also their current skills and capacity. So these analyses help us to understand the vulnerability of the particular community.
So, digging a little bit deeper, and taking that example that you took, that is, how far a particular community is away from the river facing erosion. Just give us some of the parameters you consider in exposure, some of the parameters you consider in sensitivity, and some of the parameters you consider in adaptive capacity. This is climate change theory being put in practice. So a lot of our audience will be extremely interested.
For the exposure, we want to see exactly the geographical location of the community. So how far is the river is, how frequently the flood occurred into their community, how frequently the cyclone visited them. So we try to identify how the community is exposed to different climatic shocks. And for the sensitivity, we try to understand their socioeconomic capacity and their infrastructure. So if they have the paka houses, the building, so they are not much sensitive considered the people who have the bamboo made houses. And to measure the adaptive capacity, we want to see their current practices on agriculture and water and other the livelihood issues, how they are cope up with the current situation. So these are the situations we try to observe more closely, discussing with them on the ground.
So Tausif, now one of the things that you said in response to Jaideep's question is that you work for 3 years. And I know you have certain measures of success, right? Can you talk us through what the measures of success are over that period of time?
Yes, adaptation measure is a difficult task and it takes time. But we have some indicators to measure our progress. So we want to see how much fallow land has been covered with agricultural practices, climate adaptive agricultural practices. So we can calculate the cropping intensity of the climate vulnerable areas to see how they have been improved to adapting the climate adaptive technologies and now practicing year round. Also, we compared their increase in yield and farmers' income. So we have found the farmers who have followed our advisory services and guidance, they have got 12 to 14% more yield for different crops compared to the neighboring farmers. And also, we have recorded significant net income increase for different crops. So we want to see how much production they get, also the income increase and the coverage of fallow land, cropping intensity. These are the mainly we want to see from the ground to understand their improvement in skills and practices.
Tausif, can you tell us a bit about what is fallow land? How do you define that?
Yeah, fallow land refers to the land which is not productive in terms of agriculture. So there are lands, there are no crops are growing in that land. But we also define the periodic fallow land, because in some land only one crop rice is cultivated. So the other time we can consider this land as a fallow land. So we are trying to accommodate other non-rice crops, promoting some new climate adaptive varieties of pulses and oilseeds like sunflower, mung bean, lentil. So these crops can be accommodated into those fallow periods, and it could be helpful to improve their food security and also their livelihood.
Coming back to the issue of community engagement, how do you engage women, lower income communities, minorities? How do you involve them in your decisions?
Yeah, that's an interesting story. When we started the adaptation clinic, we have found that the farmers who visited our clinic, the most of them are men. Very few women are coming to the offices. Then we tried to understand the scenario behind this issue. And we found that because adaptation clinic is far from the village, it's near to the market, and women are not much comfortable to visit our offices because they are mainly engaged in the household work. Then we have come up with an interesting innovation, which we have named as Mobile Adaptation Clinic. So we took the clinic to their houses. So every week we conduct mobile adaptation clinic in different communities. And then we found an interesting result. Into the mobile adaptation clinic, women participation are more than the men. So women are very much interested on homestead agriculture and also in agriculture into their locality, because many of the men are migrating from the climate vulnerable areas. So that's why women are coming more into the agriculture into their community. So when we took mobile adaptation clinic into their community, we have found that women are very much interested to avail the advisory services from our mobile adaptation clinic.
I find it fascinating. This is why I am so impressed with BRAC. You are always sort of trying to get to the root of problems, and then you always find these very innovative solutions. So thank you for sharing that with us, Tausif.
So far, what you have learned is climate change analysis being put in practice. So anybody who has read IPCC reports knows that there are climate stresses, increase in sea level, increase in average temperature, increase in changing monsoon patterns. But they also know that what is making things worse, much worse, I must repeat, are these non-climate stresses, deforestation, agricultural practices that deplete soil fertility, destruction of mangrove forests. And what we see in Bangladesh, which is one of the world's most climate vulnerable areas, are these two factors coming in create food insecurity issues. Now, Bangladesh today is in a much better position than it was in 1971 and is self-sufficient in rice, but there are certain crops in which it is becoming food insecure. And that is what BRAC is trying to solve. And the process that it is adapting is again textbook academic stuff being put in practice in the remotest parts of the world. Climate vulnerability assessment, understanding how much a community is exposed to a certain risk, how sensitive the community is to that risk, how much capacity does the community have to bounce back, which is called adaptive capacity, and therefore assessing vulnerability and therefore prioritizing courses of action. So thank you, Tausif, for having explained to us in what this means in real life. We're going to move on to how these ideas are put in practice in the country of Bangladesh. And we'll start, Tausif, by asking you that everybody knows Bangladesh is the land of the deltas. On the eastern part of the country, you have the Sundarbans. Take us to a project site there and explain how this entire process works.
Yes, we are working at the Satkhira district, which is near to Sundarban. When we start working in the ground, we have found that they are only growing a single paddy, single rice in a year. And the rice variety is a long duration variety. Then we motivated them to grow shorter duration of rice varieties. So if they cultivate the short duration rice varieties during the rain-fed season, then they could easily cultivate sunflower or other pulses in the winter season. Similarly, we are trying to improve their cropping pattern, discussing with them, motivating them so that they can cultivate 2 or 3 crops in a year. Also, we have found water management is a great concern for them. As well as in the rain-fed season, we also observe the erratic rainfall. So we are going with some nature-based solution. We are promoting some rainwater harvesting model and how can they store the rainwater into the canals and the ponds so that they can use those water for the later period when they need irrigation for the crops. We have tried to identify their problems on water and their cropping pattern, and then we are coming with improved cropping pattern, with better irrigation facilities, and with better crop varieties. And then now we can see they're gradually improving in practicing the year-round crops.
Tausif, this kind of behavior change, especially in a systemic way, is quite difficult. What are some of the challenges you faced to convince people to change their behavior like this?
It's interesting. In every adaptation clinic, we have agricultural doctor. So people say Qurashi doctor. So they come to the doctor, but sometimes we have found many of them are not following the advices prescribed from the doctor. But gradually, when they observe the farmers who followed the prescription, they're getting better yield. So that's why gradually the other farmers are see the result from their neighboring farmers who are following our adaptive practices. Slowly, we are motivating the other farmers to adopt the climate adaptive agricultural practices.
Tausif, tell us a little bit more about the impacts you have seen. You've been there for a while now. What kind of changes do you see on the ground in terms of use of fallow land and so on?
We have observed that in thousands of hectares, double crop can be cultivated in a year. And we have found that thousands of farmers can cultivate double crops in a year. We have found another interesting data from the ground. In some saline soil, we have come up with an idea to wrap up this soil under the plant in a pit with some polythene-like material so that the saline cannot enter into the root area. And then we measured the salinity. We have found the soil we have managed, there are the salinity is 2 decisiemens per meter. But the nearest land, which we have not managed in that way, the salinity is 6 decisiemens per meter. So this is the real difference. When we offer some solutions, we show the result to the community people so that they can understand the benefit of the technologies. We can see the progress in the south, but it will take time to change their practices for the larger communities.
Again, very interesting how you demonstrate to people the evidence. You show them the evidence of these changes and the impact it can have. Can you now take us to the coastal area? You have such a long coast. Perhaps you could describe a project site that's coastal and the vulnerabilities there and how you have engaged there.
We have some interesting stories from Potuakhali because people normally understand the salinity is the major problem there. Yes, salinity is the major problem, but the water crisis is also a great concern from them. So we have come up with some innovation with mobile solar irrigation system, which is, environment friendly. It's not taking any electricity or any fuel. So it can be operated through the solar energy. And this portable one can be moved to the different farmers' field. This is another innovation in South. And we have found that farmers are very much interested because it is less costly to them, and one solar irrigation system can be used for hundreds of farmers because it has wheels. It can be moved to the different places. This is an example how, if we can make the irrigation water available for the Potuakhali farmers, they can easily cultivate the Rabi season crops, pulses and oilseeds crops in thousands of hectares. Thus, we are actually working at the Potuakhali.
By Rabi season crop, Tausif, you mean the winter crop. Our audience should know that Bangladesh's main cropping season is during the summer monsoons, June, July, August, and Rabi season is October, November. Tausif, I have a friend who has just come back from Patuakhali, and he's working on a forestry project there, and he's telling me that the main issue there is river erosion.
Yes, in some sub-districts, the river erosion is a major issue, but in the coastal areas, government is developing newly the embankment. So in some areas, the farmers are protected. Now they need irrigation water. But yes, in many areas, river erosion is also a concern, and also the salinity intrusion, because they regularly observe the high tide and low tide. Every month, 2 times, they face the tidal wave. This is their regular life. So they're struggling with the water flooding and the salinity intrusion both also.
Again, Tausif, could you tell us about some of the impacts you've seen from these interventions?
Yes, I would happily share with you. In Potuakhali, we have successfully covered the thousands of hectares in winter. Those lands were remained fallow for decades, but now we have converted those lands by sunflower, mung bean, maize, and other crops, having the better cropping pattern with improved varieties and practices. And along with the local communities and farmers, we can turn those fallow period to the productive period for the farmers.
I know we haven't discussed biodiversity as such, but having these multiple types of crops, does that help with biodiversity? What is the impact on the ecology of the place?
Yes, of course. Pulses are resilient crops. There are some leguminous crops in pulses which can fix nitrogenous in the ground. So they can, improve the soil health. They can improve the soil health into the farmer's field. So leguminous crops, the pulses are blessings for the soil health. When farmer cultivate non-rice crops along with the rice crops, it's good for the soil health and also for the ecosystem and biodiversity.
Okay, Tausif, from the south, the eastern part of the south, the mangrove forest, to the western part of the south, which is the coast, we move up north. Tell us about a project site in the north of the country.
In the northern area, the drought is the main problem and the water scarcity. So we are trying to dig more ponds with some new technology so that the pond can store the rainwater, because Barin area is the water level is very, very low. That's why the rainwater and the water holding capacity is poor for those soils. Those soils cannot store the rainwater. Those waters easily percolate to the ground. So we have come up with a technology. We prepare a clay and the polythene structure below to the pond, and those structures are helpful to store the rainwater. And this water can be used for the many farmers for agriculture works. We have started some ponds with these new technologies. So now farmers are having year-round water to cultivate different vegetables and other crops into those areas.
Is this what you would call rainwater harvesting?
Yes, it is rainwater harvesting, and it is nature-based solution. We are trying to store rainwater as much as we can on the surface, and this water can be used for the agricultural practices.
Tausif, the words water scarcity you've talked about in all three project sites. Bangladesh receives heavy monsoon rainfall. The amount of rainfall by itself is supposed to go up under climate change scenarios. Where is the water scarcity coming from?
We have the huge rain in the monsoon, but also we have observed the shifting pattern of the rain and the season. Normally, we found the monsoon is June, July at the monsoon period in Bangladesh. But now this period is shifting. Now sometimes we see there are no rain in June, July, but August or September, maybe there are huge rain. So this shifting in rainfall pattern also hampering the farming practices on the ground. So farmers cannot cultivate the rain-fed rice as they have witnessed the shifting in the rainfall pattern.
So I guess we just see a lot of extremes. Is that correct? And what about cyclonic activity? Do you see more of that as well?
Yes, we have also witnessed the number of cyclones compared to the earlier decades. And it's a regular phenomena for the coastal areas. Cedar hit on 2007 and the Ayla later in 2009. But after that, we have seen Amphan, Mocha, but not other cyclones are in that level that can be called a super cyclone. So we are lucky. But the number of cyclones are increasing in last couple of years, what we have recorded. And these are hampering the crop production. And we have observed the damages in rice and other sunflower and maize, pulses crops because of the cyclones.
How successful have your initiatives in Sapahar been in terms of using this rainwater harvesting, and have you been able to overcome the worst effects of the drought? Can you reverse this problem of water scarcity?
Yes, the story of Sapahar is very much unique. If you visit the Sapahar, 20 years ago, rice was the common crop in Sapahar. But right now, you won't see any rice crop in Sapahar. All the rice fields are converted to mango fields. So this is the story in Sapahar. Similarly, in northern areas, many of the rice fields are turned into the orchards because of the water scarcity. So we have tried to incorporate other non-rice crops into the mango fields, which we called intercropping. Normally, farmers keep fallow in between the mango field, but we have advised them to cultivate onion, garlic, tomato, potato, along with the mango trees in the ground. And it's also making another revolution for them. They are having more crops, they are having more extra income, practicing the cropping pattern into the orchard field, incorporating the other crops, intercropping other crops into the mango fields.
Does these crops require less water, or because now you have been able to harvest more water from the rainwater? How is this happening?
These crops require less water compared to rice, but irrigation is required for those crops too. But these irrigations are managed from the surface water preserved from the rainwater harvesting system, which we have promoted on the ground. Also, we have suggested another technique. We are expanding the vermicompost preparation into the different locations, which is also interesting for the Sapahar. So when they applied organic fertilizer on the soil, so soil health is improving, because in northern Barin part, this soil is not in that standard what we have found in other areas. In Barin region, the soil is grey terrace soil. So this is more acidic soil. So if we add more organic material, more organic fertilizer into the soil health is also improving, and it also good for the crop production.
Tausif, tell us a little bit about those rainwater harvesting ponds that you have created. Are they community owned? Are they community managed?
Yes, these are community-based model. So we motivate them, and after discussing, the community come up with some resources, and we also provide some resources. So this is a kind of cost sharing approach. So community and BRAC both work together to restoring the canal with new technology so that the water can be stored into those canals. And there is an agreement with the community so that how many households can use this water for next 5 years. This is a community-based approach. More people can access those water for agriculture practices.
Tausif, thank you so much for telling us about these very interesting projects. I'm very interested in frugal innovation, and Abid Bhai was also a big fan of frugal innovation. How much do these projects cost, and where do you get the money from?
I would say this model is not so expensive for the participants. On an average, per participant cost is less than 4 to 5,000. If we make average, including all areas, so it is less than 4 to 5,000 taka for each participant. So this is not so costly.
4 to 5,000 taka per month, per year? How do you calculate it?
4 to 5,000 taka per year. Because when the farmers are enrolled into our adaptation clinic model, we work with them for a year closely, and we spend some money for providing quality inputs and other technologies and practices. But after 1 year, we provide only follow-up services to them. If we count the 1 year programming, it is average 4,000 to 5,000 taka per participant. We can provide the climate adaptive agriculture services to them.
And where does your funding come from? How are you supporting these projects?
We have started it's near about 3 years. So at first, BRAC has come up with his own fund. Right now, we have some funding from different bank in Bangladesh. They are funding from their CSR. And we are getting attention from different donor agencies. So we are hopeful we'll have more fund on these nice works. We are also trying to collaborate, within the BRAC and other organizations so that we can think about the sustainability part, or how can we move ahead with this model for more decades so that if the funding is less, how can we continue these services for the farmers? We have started to think of it.
I know that this is a big issue now for not just BRAC, but Bangladesh as it moves into middle income status. Maybe some of the big donors, the aid agencies, won't be sending money like they used to. So can you tell us, Tausif, how you are doing that? Is it that the farmers are willing and able to pay more for these services now? Will you move the finance model more towards a payment-based model? Could you tell us a bit about that?
Yes, I can share an example with you. Farmers having the irrigation in the field, suppose one farmer is paying 100 taka for 1 hour for the irrigation purposes. So if we can make the solar irrigation system available for them, and if we charge them 50 taka for hour, which is 50% less than their current practices, farmers are willing to take this. We are trying to come up with this kind of cost sharing and low cost model so that the farmers' current cost will be decreased, but at the same time, we can also continue the services for the longer term.
Jadip, as I hear Tausif speak, obviously many of these interventions are frugal, as he himself said, the change in practices, creating ponds for storing rainwater. But even items that require capital expenditure, for example, the solar irrigation pump, to be used in a model where a lot of farmers can use it, that decreases the per farmer cost. One sort of reflection I had was that the climate change threat is coming from land subsidence, it is coming from rising seawater level, it's coming from river erosion. Tausif, this is great. Obviously, the examples that you gave from various parts of the country, the big question is how does it scale up? How in the next 10 years do we see 75 project sites, 100 project sites?
You see, Bangladesh is affected because of the climate change. But how much we are responsible for the climate change? We are only emitting less than 0.5% of the greenhouse gases. But the developing countries, they are emitting the gases, but we are paying much because of the climate change issues. So the people of Bangladesh, we have the right to have fund from the developing countries and from the donor agencies because we are suffering. The peoples are in the climate vulnerable areas, in the coast and in the Barin and also in the hills. Peoples are struggling because of the climatic situation, climatic adverse condition. We are asking more large fund from the international agencies so then we can scale up the proven model to develop the adaptive capacity and to restore their livelihood in the climate vulnerable areas.
And rightly so. And Bangladesh's contribution to setting up the Loss and Damage Fund is understood by all nations in the global south very clearly. What we've heard from you, Tausif, is academic literature and reports. We read the word locally led adaptation. Adaptation efforts need to understand the local context, and it needs to be led by communities who are affected. And I think what you're doing, Tausif, and the vivid word picture that you have created for us from the south, the mangrove forests, to the coasts, to up north, water and drought is a major issue, puts these words in real life. It helps us understand what locally led adaptation, what community-based adaptation really mean. So thank you very much. And if people want to get in touch with you, to visit you, how should they?
Anyone can reach out to me from my email, tausif.qureshi@brac.net. And also, I'm available on my LinkedIn, Tausif Ahmed Qureshi.
With that, thank you very much.
Thank you, Tausif. That has been wonderful.
I'd like to thank both of you for inviting me, and I will invite the other audience to visit us and to learn more from BRAC and our experience from the ground. Thank you very much to all of you.
If you like this podcast, do visit us on regainparadise.org, regainparadise.com. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn, and you can also subscribe to these podcasts on Anchor, Spotify, Google, Apple, and YouTube.